Hello, my name is Sascha Preibisch, and today I would like to do a short video and introduce an upcoming specification called OAuth 2 Pushed Authorization Requests. This is currently in draft 4, so it will take a while until this becomes a RFC standard, but because it's quite stable, I thought I'll give an introduction to it and provide the idea behind the main focus of it. So the highlights, it's an OAuth 2 extension to further secure authorization requests. All request parameters are hidden from the front channel, so the idea is that if you think of a redirect URI where you would include all parameters, those are visible to other potentially JavaScript clients or users themselves, and to secure these parameters, they will not be shown in the front channel browser URL. The client authenticates before the actual authorization request is sent. So the server is able to validate client credentials before the actual flow is happening, which allows the server to deny any request really early in the whole authorization process. As I said, it's currently in draft 4, and this is the URL where you can find the full spec and read up on it yourself. So how does it work? As usual, we have a client, we have an authorization server with an authorization endpoint, and a browser. So to explain how it works with PAR, let's have a look how the existing flow would look like. A client would usually send a redirect URI using GET to the authorize endpoint through the browser, and it would include the default parameters like response type, scope, client ID, and other parameters. The authorization endpoint would receive this request, validate the request, and after the user got authenticated and the user granted this request, the authorization server will return an authorization code, in this example, to your redirect URI. So with PAR, pushed authorization requests, it will look slightly different. So first of all, it starts off with a message through the back channel, so no browser involved, and there's a new endpoint called PAR or PAR authorize, however the authorization server would like to call it. So the first request is the post to PAR, and it includes the same parameters as before, but in the message body. And in addition, as I mentioned, the client will authenticate if it has a client ID and a secret. So if it's a confidential client. Otherwise, it would include the client ID as before. But in this case, the client includes the client ID, client secret, and the PAR endpoint is able to validate the incoming request. After this request has been validated, which will essentially be the same as if it had been a request to the authorization endpoint, the server will return a JSON-based message including this parameter request URI. This URI is unique to the session and is meant for this session only for this client in this point in time, and it has an expiration date. The next step for the client is to start the actual authorization request as we've seen it before. But in this case, the GET request to the authorize endpoint will include the request URI as returned here and the client ID. This certainly must match the one that was shown in this request. And as soon as the authorization endpoint has validated the incoming request, it will then again return the authorization code to the redirect URI. So that part is going to be the same as before. It's important to know that the request URI is a new parameter which has to be included in this request, but it cannot be included in this original request. So the authorization or OpenID Connect parameters in here are all the same, but not the request URI. This is the main idea, hiding all of these parameters from being visible in the browser. In addition, the spec specifies new metadata. For the authorization server, as specified in RFC 8414, authorization server metadata, there's an additional parameter called pushed authorization request endpoint. And this endpoint, this is the endpoint that supports PAR if the server supports it. So as with other flows, the client can retrieve the metadata, look for this value, and send a request to this endpoint. For the client, as specified in 7591 dynamic registration, client registration, there's a new parameter called require pushed authorization requests, and this is a Boolean value. If this is set to true, this client can only use PAR flows. This will prevent this client from switching between, let's call it the normal, the default authorization flow, and the PAR flow. These parameters may not only be used in these RFCs, but also in the OpenID Connect metadata endpoint, and maybe not only with dynamic client registration, but as a configuration value for clients on servers that maybe not even support dynamic client registration. And this is it. This was a very short video. Give you an idea what's coming up. Maybe I'll post an update as soon as this spec is finalized. Please leave a comment, ask questions if you have one or many, and please subscribe. Have a good day.